This is Set Theory, a podcast that inspires others by unveiling the theory behind the creative process. So, welcome to the 0th episode, or I guess, is that a word? 0th episode? Welcome to episode 0. So what does that mean, the 0th episode? The 0th episode is almost like a pilot episode. Kind of get to know me and I get to know you in some ways. First episode would be more short form stuff. We'll be more focused on my process and how I approach a particular project or a particular problem, and also bringing on others and ask them how they would approach a problem or how they approach a particular project that they made, stuff like that. So, which, by the way, I'm speaking from the future. I've made mistakes with this episode already, which is fine because that's the whole point of this podcast and my journey along the way. It's not here to be perfect right away on the first get-go. The fact that I'm recording this from the future means that I've already learned from my mistakes and I recognize the things I could do better for the next episode or for episode 1. Oh, remember, this is the 0th episode, right? Past Imsety, that guy was nervous. I'm still kind of nervous now, but it's kind of like driving. It's like at first you nervous, feels like you may have a panic attack. Now it's like, oh, okay, I can do this with my eyes closed. Okay, don't drive with your eyes closed. You get what I'm trying to say though. But don't do that. But you get the analogy, right? Like, for example, this time I'm not even using the script anymore. I'm just going off of my brain. See, before in the first podcast episode, the one that I recorded in the past, my past self, I put my microphone right in front of me like this. I realized looking back that that's actually not that great. That's not good mic technique, because if you put your mic right next to your mouth, you're going to get more plosives. Now my task is to fix that in post. Make sure that sounds at least somewhat tolerable. As you watch this podcast, just keep that in mind. Like, this is a learning process for me. It's literally my first time reading a script, being in front of the camera like this and talking, and the fact that I have to maintain eye contact with this thing. Yeah, so if you're looking for a highly produced episode, here's my recommendation. Set a reminder 1 year from now and then come back. By then I have it all figured out. Maybe I have a set behind me or something. I don't know. So what I'm trying to say is that this podcast is about my journey, how I evolve. If you want to stick around for that, I think you should. So in this episode, I'm going to talk about my present, past, and future. So it's going to be, first I'm going to talk about who I am. Then I'm going to talk about the journey of how I got here and my story and how I got into motion design. And then finally, I'm going to talk about what this podcast really is, what the name of the podcast means, and also my goals for this podcast moving forward. Let's get started. So let's start first by asking this question. Who am I? Well, my name is Imsety Taylor, and I'm an 18-year-old self-taught multidisciplinary creative based in Atlanta, Georgia. My main focuses are motion design, software development, and music production. But I also have mild interest in sound design, filmmaking, and photography. I guess you could say I like building things and solving problems. Currently, I'm the founder of my design studio and media company, Imsety Media. I enjoy sharing my creative process in the community via open channels like social media and this podcast you're listening to right now. My personal interests range from playing video games to listening to a variety of music, of which serves as one of my biggest inspirational foundations for designing. I believe that music is paramount to my creative process. So now you know who I am. The next question then becomes, how did I get here? Where did I come from? I was born in 2003, and creative energy has always been in my atmosphere. Both my mom and my dad drew since they were children. My mom is an all-around artist. She paints, does illustration, she's a writer, she did poetry, interior design, sewing, photography, cooking. And my dad, he did graphic design, print design, web design, UX, UI design, layout design. He's a strategist. He likes making systems. Today, he's actually a creative director, and they both went to SCAD. My dad majored in digital and print design, and my mom majored in interior design and later studied fiber art and design. I think it's safe to say that I've grown up around creators. With those seeds planted in my mind and my DNA, I remember being exposed to technology at a young age, which later became an important tool to how I became a creative today. And around, say, 2009, maybe I was about 5 or 6 years old, I found a Sony camcorder my mom and dad had laying around, and I just kind of made short skits with it and recorded stuff around the house. This was my introduction to making things and for the sake of making things. I guess for the art of it, like just making things and having fun with it, not worrying about the final product. I remember since I was only 6 years old, I made skits about me dancing around in the hallway and with music playing in the background, all that stuff and all sorts of things. But later that year, my grandfather gave me a Dell laptop for Christmas. That laptop was the first ever computer I've ever owned. I mean, it was a really small laptop. It had like a 12-inch screen. It ran Windows XP. It had a decent webcam, I guess for the time, of course. But for a 6-year-old, that laptop was like the ultimate toy. Like, for example, I remember downloading Audacity, which is like an audio editing software. And I remember recording my voice and messing around with the audio effects, making my voice high pitched, stuff like that. The one thing I used it for the most was to make videos. Because this laptop had a webcam, I made short comedy skits and movies, much like what I was doing with the camcorder I mentioned earlier. Now, at the time, since I was only like 6 years old, I was always daydreaming of who I wanted to be when I grew up. I remember watching the Food Network with my mom and going, I want to be a chef. I guess watching Good Eats and Ratatouille left an impression on me. So what I did was I recorded myself making cooking tutorials with that laptop and then put them up on YouTube. Obviously, nobody watched them. But looking back on it, that was my first exposure to making things and putting it up on the internet. As I was making these short skits and cooking videos, I realized I enjoyed the making part more than the doing part, if that makes sense. I enjoyed the process of recording and putting the video together just to see the final result. I thought to myself, maybe I want to make movies. I went from wanting to become a chef to wanting to become a director. Fast forward to 2012. Wait, no, that's the one. Fast forward to 2011. I'm 7 years old, and now I have a MacBook Pro with iMovie on it, my first introduction to editing. Before then, I had to record my videos in one take. For a 7-year-old, that was difficult. So this opened up a whole new world of possibilities. Using iMovie was when I really got into editing. iMovie had these movie trailer templates where you can put in your own footage and it makes it look like a big blockbuster film. Around that time, the Iron Man movies had just come out, and I was a huge fan of those movies. Like, huge fan. So at one point, I made a trailer for a fake Iron Man sequel called Iron the Iron Man. Iron and the Iron Man, where I recorded myself in my room with a Thor Iron Man helmet and a Nerf gun, like a full-blown action movie. I don't know what I was thinking. But, hey, I had fun, so that's all that matters, right? Unfortunately, I probably have that video saved somewhere, but anyway. I then discovered this video game called Roblox. Think of it like a virtual sandbox where you can play games other people have made, but also have the ability to make your own games too. I saw this as an ultimate movie set. So what I did was I came up with the story and then acted it out in Roblox while recording my screen. Then I put it together in iMovie to make a fake trailer for the movie I just created. Later on, I also discovered Minecraft, similar to Roblox, but this time it's more like a digital Lego. I like building stuff in those games, then recording and editing what I had done. I built whole cities that I came up with my friends and showed it off on YouTube. Making stuff in those video games was fun for me at the time. And I thought to myself, maybe I want to be a game designer. Obvious connection, right? I like making stuff in video games, so why not make video games? That was my logic at the time, I guess. We're now in 2013. I'm still doing these things and making these videos. I'm about 9 years old. My friend approached me and saw one of the fake studio idents I've made for one of my movie trailers. For context, iMovie had this template that looked a lot like the Universal Studios logo, and I just put my name on it and uploaded it on YouTube, claiming that I made it. I don't know. Anyways, my friend asked me if I could make them an intro like that for their YouTube channel. And I was like, sure. I made an intro for him with that template, and then he used it at the beginning of his videos. I then later uploaded what I made on my YouTube channel, I guess as a portfolio / here's what I made type thing. Then that spread by word of mouth. Another friend asked me to make an intro for them. Then another friend. Then another. Each time, it's just a little bit more custom tailored than the previous one. Because the ideas and the requests started to get more and more complex, I ended up outgrowing iMovie and I switched to Final Cut Pro. I couldn't afford it at the time, so I just downloaded it over and over again to restart the free trial. I was cheating the system, Using it wasn't too hard to figure out because iMovie and Final Cut Pro was so similar. Anyways, before I knew it, I became the intro guy in my circle. As this was starting to get popular in May of 2013, I made a video officially announcing that I was making free intros. And by the way, this is when I coined the name Imsety Media. See, a long time ago, my dad came up with it as a name for a media company, kind of like how it is now. At the time, I used it as a creative alias for what I was doing. In that video, I put a link in the description to a drop form that people could fill out with the channel name, what they wanted the intro to look like, color, font, link. Because I was doing them for free, the only thing I asked for in return is if they subscribe to my YouTube channel. I mean, that's fair, right? But I didn't force it all that much, because I saw it as a free practice to work on my editing skills. In just 6 months, my form grew to 60 requests. I didn't know what I was doing, but whatever it was working, so hey. In July of 2013, as the requests started to get more and more complicated, I started to teach myself Premiere Pro through YouTube tutorials and Google. My Google just went off. I have a Google Home. My Google nearly just went off. All right. I didn't know what it was at the time, but that was the moment I really got into motion design. I spent the rest of the year making intros with people in Premiere Pro. Each time I just got a little bit better. I went from using templates to making custom-made intros for people. I taught myself keyframing, composition, pacing, all that stuff, and used that newfound skill to introduce a new product in my services: 3D intros. Then I introduced more services. I started making YouTube banners, profile pictures, thumbnails. This is how I got into graphic design and understood the basics of Photoshop. In 2015, my dad encouraged me to take a course on HTML and CSS, and I've started learning web development and programming on and off ever since. I did these so often that from 2013 to 2015, that's 2 years, I made almost 400 intros in that time. All in Premiere Pro, and doing that was the best practice I could have ever gotten. I still know Premiere Pro like the back of my hand to this day because of how many hours I put into making these things. I was 12 years old at the time. During that journey, I realized how much I liked animating stuff. So my dream became the usual, I want to go to Pixar one day. I went from wanting to become a game designer to animator. It's now 2016. The year, I would say, is when I really started to grow as an artist. But really, as a creator. This was the year I got into music. Back then, when I listened to music, I sometimes got frustrated that the track went in a direction that I didn't agree with. Like a beat drops in a way I didn't expect, and I go, what? Like, man, I would have done that differently. That pretty much became my motivation to learn how to produce music. I wanted to make music that I would want to listen to. So along the intro stuff, I started to make my own beats in FL Studio and mess around with that on the side every now and again. It was never anything official. I just kind of tried it out one day and it stuck, you know. Later that year, I realized I was actually part of a bigger community than I thought. Before then, still 2016, by the way, I thought I was the only one doing intros. I thought I was in my own little bubble. As I dug a little deeper, I realized that I was doing something called motion design. I discovered this motion designer that was popular in the motion design YouTube community at the time, Geeky Brackets. His style involved a lot of moving shapes and spinning circles in After Effects. It's hard to explain, but nevertheless, I became hypnotized by his work. Not only that, but he did work for big names at the time, like the Diamond Minecart. I don't know if y'all heard of him, but he is kind of still is, a big Minecraft YouTuber. So I was like, for a 12-year-old, that was a big deal. Like, oh, this guy worked for a channel that I've actually watched. At the time, his work was next level to me, so I had to go. I wanted to make stuff like him. I started pivoting to mastering After Effects. At the time, I used it a little in the past for color correction for my 3D Blender renders, stuff like that, but never for actual animation. My plan was I doubled down on the free intros, but this time with the intention of learning After Effects. Just like what I did with Premiere Pro, I just got a little bit better, but that compounded. So after a few months of practicing and growing my portfolio with stuff I made in After Effects, I made another video announcing that I'm making free intros with a link to a Google form in the description. When I did that, I ran into a problem. I guess a good problem if you really think about it. The better I got, the more popular I became, and the more submissions I received. In just 2 weeks after I uploaded that video, I got over 140 submissions, and it just kept growing. So much so that I had to announce that I was closing the forum by the end of the month. I didn't want that much practice, you know what I mean? Like, that would have been too much work, you know? I actually ended up closing it early than I said because more and more people were starting to request an intro. By the time I had to close it down, I've gotten over 150 submissions. So for the rest of that summer, I was grinding, like really grinding. I took this as a free opportunity to practice and get better at my craft. Because the intros were free and I didn't make any hard promises, it was okay if the intros came in a little late. You know the 10,000 hour rule where they say you need 10,000 hours of intensive practice to get really good at that one particular skill? Well, I truly do believe that sprint of work I did from not pouring on was my 10,000 hours, especially if you include all the work I did years prior. I was doing the exact same thing over and over again, failing, making mistakes, learning from them, and then becoming 1% better each time. This is when I figured out that if you do enough of the same thing enough times, at some point, you will get good at it. This is also the year that I made my first dollar making these things. A guy from Latvia, a country in Europe that I've never heard of before up until that point, approached me and asked me to make a YouTube channel trailer for him. By the way, a channel trailer is like basically like a welcome video for a YouTube channel. My task was I had to chop up a highlight montage of his YouTube videos over narration of him speaking in a language that I did not understand at all. See, at first, I was going to make it for him for free, but he insisted on paying me. He really wanted to compensate me for my work. I just said, okay. I think I got offered like $15 to $20, but for a 12-year-old, that was a lot of money, so it didn't matter. I quickly got together a PayPal account that my mom had laying around and used it to send off a PayPal request. After I received the money and completed the work, I realized I reached the point where my work was so good that people were willing to pay me for it. No, they were insisting on paying me for it. They wanted to give me money for it. I thought that was crazy. It opened my eyes to what I was really capable of. Like, I can make money from this? Like, what? So, with that in mind, it's the end of 2016, and I made intros for many big YouTubers at the time, and I was really proud of my work. I definitely reached my goal of being like Geeky Brackets faster than I thought. It's crazy to think at the beginning of that year, I went from not knowing what motion design even was to then becoming one of the more popular upcoming figures in that small pocket of YouTube. So in 2017, I was 13 years old. I dropped doing free work entirely and solely focused on doing paid commissions. This became my first business. I opened up a Selfie store, which at the time was like a Gumroad type platform where you could sell digital products, stuff like that. It's actually still around. And on there, I had a setup where you could buy intro and outro, I think YouTube banners, profile pictures, pretty much the usual stuff. What I was doing before, but this time I wasn't doing it for free. I was actually earning a profit from it. I actually forgot how much I sold it for. How much did I sold it for? Yeah, I think I sold them for $15 to $20 a piece, something like that. I knew I wasn't good at pricing at that time. I had a fear of, I was scared of rejection, I guess. I was scared of making my prices so high that people wouldn't buy it. So I ended up kind of, in some cases, underselling myself. Later, it kind of evolved and it grew to $45, maybe $50. And that whole process was my first exposure to real freelance work, at least baby freelance work. It's how I learned how to talk to clients, how to handle feedback, all that stuff. Looking back on it, it was a very educational experience. I'm glad I had that journey. So this is working. I remember being able to buy equipment upgrades for my setup with the money I made by myself. Interesting thing, really, that I brought with the intro money was a Novation MIDI controller. You're watching the video version, is actually like right there. This thing was basically like a digital piano that you could plug into your computer and use to make music. That MIDI controller came with a free version of Ableton Live. And at that time, before then, I was using FL Studio. I was still using FL Studio. But because Ableton Live reminded me so much of After Effects, I switched to that. And I've been using it ever since, still using it to this day. And from that point on, that's when I actually tried to get better at producing music. And again, I taught myself through trial and error, through YouTube and Google. But anyways, back to the intros. From that point on, I figured out a formula. The business is doing really well and only got better and better. At one point, I transitioned from Blender to Cinema 4D, and I immersed myself deeper into 3D, using tutorials from iDesign and Grayscale Gorilla and Screw Motion, stuff like that. So now this formula really started to set in. Maybe I got a little too comfortable doing these. You know when you're watching a TV show and you see like a montage of the character doing the same thing over and over again over a long length of time? That's pretty much what I was doing at time skip. So fast forward to 2019, I'm now 15 years old, and I have to be honest, I was feeling a little burnt out. I didn't know what I wanted to do next. I've been doing paid commission work for 3 years. Every now and again, maybe a big project, like a big client project with my dad every now and again. Really, 6 years, I've been doing work for 6 years altogether if you were to count the free intro journey. Even though I was still learning a lot at the time and starting to get better and better at my craft and programs like After Effects and Cinema 4D and other creative apps. Even at one point, I used my web development skills for a big client project that I was working on. It was like this stream overlay I made in HTML and CSS, and the client could edit the overlay through a desktop app I made. It was actually kind of neat. It was like I made, and it was technically the first time I made a proper app like that's not on the web. So anyway, besides all that, I still felt stagnant, like I wasn't going anywhere. What am I going to do next? I can't be doing intros and commissions forever. It wasn't until November of 2019 that I got an email for a motion design tour event that was being hosted in my city, Atlanta. It was called the 3D Motion Design Tour by Maxon, and it was hosted by Matthias Amatala. They had speakers like Nick Campbell from Grayscale Gorilla and Anthonios Pazantis, also known as Noseman. Perhaps I could talk more about this in the episode, but to keep it short, I remember I was really nervous. It was my first time going to one of these events/meetups. I remember I asked my dad to go there on a whim because I knew I couldn't miss out on that. I usually don't see these type of meetup events in my area, so I was like, why not go? So my goal was to come up to the stage, ask a question, meet the speakers, and give them my business card. In reality, I did all those things. It was cool seeing like-minded people all in one spot like that. Before then, I was used to seeing that online in a small little bubble. Seeing the host present new Cinema 4D features and hearing the stories of the speakers talking about their own projects inspired me a lot. Even though this event was actually quite simple. It's funny how this event took place in November. And I might go off on a tangent, but there's a song by Tyler, the Creator, titled November, where he talks about the things that changed him when he looks back and what influenced his life. At the end of the track, he interviews people and asks them what was their November, so to speak, aka the times of their life that influenced them the most. Well, going to this event was my November. I saw all these people and what's possible in the industry. My eyes were wide open. I realized motion design is more than just spinning shapes on the screen. It was a reminder that big companies like Nike and Apple want this stuff too. So with that in mind, I quit doing intros and paid commissions full time. I also remember around that time, my dad put me on the LinkedIn. So now the thought of expanding my network and meeting new people outside my circle became important. I spent 2020 connecting with people on LinkedIn, making fun short sketches, getting to know the motion design community beyond what I knew. I was trying to grow my portfolio and presence beyond the YouTube community. During that time, I also learned how to make mobile apps in a framework called Flutter that year, which is a fun and educational time. You know, looking back, I wish I could have done more that year. More grand person projects, stuff like that. At the time, I was doing very, I would say, low scope Instagram videos. Sometimes life takes you down a different path than you plan, and I've come to accept that. So in 2021, I spent some time doing some self-discovery. I started to realize that I enjoyed making things in general, not just design. Throughout this whole journey, I viewed web development and music as just a hobby. I realized those skills could be part of my toolkit too. It was more than just something I did. It was actually an actual talent that I could market and share to people. After I realized this, I reflected on this change by rebranding my online identity to Imsety, my real name. All this time, I was going by the name Seti Media. The Seti Media name was then spun off into an actual studio and media company. We're now in the present day. And right now, I'm putting focus on building things, teaching people, and having fun. And you know who I am, and you know how I got here. What's next? What am I doing now? Because there are a few things I want to cover, let's make this segment a Q&A format. Okay? All right. First question. Why did I start this podcast? So the answer is threefold. People often ask me how to get started in motion design, software development, music. I feel like this would serve as a great platform to teach people the theory behind my process and to bring on other creators and invite them to share their process too. A lot of people think that making things is complicated. I have a theory that 9 times out of 10 is actually quite simple, that there is something beyond creativity. I want the show to investigate and showcase that theory. Secondly, I've written detailed case studies for my projects in the past, and by the way, check them out on Imsety.com. Just saying. Okay. In doing so, sometimes there are a lot of things I want to cover, but I have to hold back to avoid a long, overly detailed article. So I feel like this podcast can serve as an extended behind-the-scenes cut of my work, so to speak, and another outlet to share my process. And finally, having a platform where I can speak my mind and share with others is great. Second question. What does set theory mean? Well, it's a cool name. That's it. No. Okay. But for real. So in mathematics, set theory is the actual thing. Set theory is the study of sets, also known as a collection of objects. Think of a Venn diagram, two circles intersecting, and in the middle, showing the union of what those two sets have in common. That's set theory. I think this name is a great metaphor for what this podcast would be about. Creators in general are usually in a complicated position. We often struggle to pinpoint exactly what we do and who we are because we do so many things. I like to say that multidisciplinary creators are like a living Venn diagram, a union of all of our interests in one. The name also circles back to my personal contribution to the podcast. It's a play on words. Imsety, seti, set theory. Get it? I'll talk about the theory behind my creative process. Imsety's theory. Set theory. Get it? Set theory also has a meaning in music. In music, set theory is about the study of the relationship of different musical notes. Because this podcast is all about creators, music producers all fall in that category too. At some point, I want to dive deep into my musical process and bring on other musical artists too. Basically, study the relationship of different musical processes. Going back on the mathematical definition, set theory is the study of a collection of objects, right? In programming, you deal with objects all the time. That's what makes object-oriented programming object-oriented. I'm planning on hosting a platform for coders and developers too. The fivefold nature of this name is why I picked it. And that is what it means. Third question. Will you have guests? Yes, I will. Very soon. I hope to use this platform to showcase other people's creative theory and maybe one day host workshops or talks. And finally, last question. What's the goal of this podcast? As I'm recording this podcast's official mission statement is to inspire others by unveiling the theory behind the creative process. So I guess that. But short-term goals, I want to build a community and connect like-minded people who are in this sort of creator Venn diagram space. I'm going to do that by building in public. I'm thinking of making this a weekly thing where I'm going to use this podcast to reveal the curtain and show the process and story behind how I made a particular thing I made that week. Something that motivates me to put something out there and share with the community. I wish I had more frequently asked questions to answer, but that's all I can think of for now. Well, I think that's it. So, thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate it if you made it this far. I know I'm probably going to have to invest in a pop filter and fix that, don't worry. First episode, this is how it's going to be. I'm planning on publishing episode highlights, updates, and more. So if you're interested in that, feel free to follow the podcast at Set Theory on Twitter and Instagram. Oh, and I was very lucky with the handle, by the way. I'm surprised it wasn't taken for real. You think it'd be a common thing, but I guess not. Maybe it was meant to be. I don't know. If you want to learn more about me and my work, please check out my website at imsety.com. If you have any ideas for topics you want to be covered on this podcast, general feedback, or simply just want to say hello, feel free to send me a DM on Twitter and Instagram at imse_ty. That's Imsety with the underscore for the T. Links are in the description. If you are watching the video version and have enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to know when the next episode comes out. And please, let me know your thoughts in the comments, for real. I'm going to try and read and reply to all of them. Alright, see you next time.